I'm really grateful that you came. I'm still thinking the leadership group will be coming in, but I don't want to take any more of this beautiful afternoon away from you. And I appreciate your willingness to come out on such a gorgeous, albeit cold, day. And I want to thank Karen for the hospitality of today, for welcoming me in our book, and for welcoming me in general. When Brian decided that this would be his church, you have, and this whole congregation has made this a wonderful experience, and I'm happy to accompany him in his faith journey here. So thank you, Karen. There's a few other people that should be thanked who are also in the book, so I need to mention that. And that is my daughter, Crystal, and her daughter, Julia. The book was a COVID project, and they made COVID possible, bearable. And out there welcoming everybody are two dear friends who were on my speed dial and accompanied me through this and many other things. I'm very, very grateful. And so, of course, I called on you to do this too. Thank you for again showing up. So, let's begin.
Wait. You asked me to introduce you.
Oh my gosh!
I did work too.
Oh my
Wait, where's
gosh.
my notes?
But thank yous are okay. Yeah.
No.
Oh, she's dancing.
Yeah.
I Googled you.
You Google. Oh man. Oh dear. Heaven help us. Who knows what you're at?
So she had emailed last week and said, could you introduce me? You know what does any good 21st century individual do? They Google. So this is what Miss Google said about born in New London, Connecticut, to a returning World War II paratrooper and his bride, Kathleen was the firstborn of 8 children, 7 of whom were girls. Growing up among sisters naturally led to an interest in the interior lives of women. She brought that curiosity and compassion to the lives of biblical women in her later studies and ministry, and developed scripture studies and stories that plumb a woman's heart. She holds a Master's of Divinity from Seattle University and loves working at the intersection of women's studies and scriptures. She loves working ecumenically and has always included people from a wide variety of religious traditions. She draws widely from Hebrew studies as well as Christian, frequently employing the rabbinical tool of midrash to creatively enter biblical stories. She now lives in Northwest Arkansas. And they say that true wisdom isn't having the answers to all of life's questions, but knowing what questions to ask. So, there you go. Why these women? Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. What a great question to draw some wisdom from. So thanks for being part of our community and for doing this here today. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I got so thrown by our late start that I overlooked that, and that was worth the price of admission. You can feel free to say this is all admission. Well, it's great. So in the Bible, there is a verse that is spoken by one of our heroines, Rahab. When Joshua sends the spies into Jericho to reconnoiter it for possible conquest, he sends them to the house of Rahab the prostitute. And she says to them at one point, I have heard of your God. We don't even know what she's heard. But that makes all the difference in her story, in this story, and in everything that happens from there. If there were a modern day Rahab who had heard of your God, she might go out and get one of these books, because rumor has it that you can find out a thing or two about God in this book. And so she might open it up, and she might further want to know about this Jesus person that God sent to show us human people how to live, how to get this right. You should have to look and look and look, and eventually she'd get to, oh yeah, the New Testament of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Turn the first page. See now the Gospel of Matthew, the first of 4 stories that tell you about the great story. And she'd look at it, and it would say, an account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah, and so on. And if she were like most of us, she would read that ho-hum and continue to read. But let us assume that this Rahab has a particularly inquiring mind and needs to know. So she's going to go back and she's going to notice in reading that you know what, there were 4 women's names. Maybe, since I really don't know anything about this, maybe I got to find out who they are, and that way, when I find out about Jesus, I'll already know. This is the premise. That if you know those stories and you bring them with you into the great story, you will encounter something a little bit different, because unlike 2,000 years of lived experience, we will go into the Christ story aware of the placement and importance of women. It's kind of a new idea, truly. So, I have on your tables this little cheat sheet, which you have plenty of time to look at. And I want to be a very good steward of our time together, because you've already been so patient, and I hope you've enjoyed community while you've been together. And what I'd like to do is treat this book a little bit like a box of chocolates. We can't do all of it, but we can do some of it. So, from the little cheat sheet here, this little walkthrough, we have the 4 women listed along with their subtitles. You might notice the subtitles give you some kind of idea of the nature of their stories. Tamar, always save your receipts for services rendered. Rahab, the Bible's hooker with a heart of gold. Ruth, dear sweet Ruth, still has a little spicy scene. What happens on the threshing floor? And Bathsheba sleeping with the enemy. Of course, we also have Mary. She is listed also in that genealogy at the very end. Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Christ was born. And Jesus. Because that is where we're going to, making a difference in the story of Jesus. So those are our 6 main characters. 6 chapters, actually 7. The first one explains how we're using the tools in here. Sacred questions, I call them, that break open the text. We're going to look at power. We're going to ask, what does it take for someone to get out of an oppressive situation? We're going to tell stories through Midrash. What if? Very much like Karen said, it's the questions that unlock things. There's background, so there's some scholarship in there. This is what I'm going to tell you as the author of the book, though. If that's not your bailiwick, and you're getting ground down, and I don't want all those details, that's okay. Skim it and go on, because I think there's something, the reason there's so many different approaches is because we all learn differently. We all have our aha moments in unpredictable and surprising ways. And then lastly, there is the question always, is this still true today? And I think this is really for me in writing the book, where the rubber hit the road. There's prayer, and the book is designed more as a book club read than a Bible study. So there's discussions at the end to go back to. When all was said and done, I put down on the backside what I took away from these my takeaways from the study. And yours might be some of these or not. Some of them that might not make the case, but others may. So I just want to do a little walkthrough of that. And I kind of indicated that we would do this, again, we only have time for maybe one or two women or one or two of the things that pop into your mind as a question there. But let's see how, name recognition. How many people know the story of Tamar? Now this is not Tamar, David's daughter. This is Tamar in Genesis, Judah's daughter-in-law. Tamar? Not too many. She's pretty obscure. Okay, got that. What about how many people know Rahab? And I just gave you a little clue on her. Okay, that's about twice as many. How about Ruth? Oh, everybody loves Ruth. And how about Bathsheba? And what do you know about Bathsheba? Anyone else see what you think of when you think Bathsheba? What's what you think of?
Bathing on the roof.
Bathing on the roof, yes. I'm surprised they don't use her in commercials, actually. Yeah. Okay. So, which one of these should we maybe select? And if there's a reason for your favorite, tell me what it is.
Which one's your favorite?
Oh, that's like asking which is your favorite kid, and it's the one that you're with. So that would, of course, be Crystal. That's a very good question, but it is kind of true, which what everyone I'm writing about is the favorite at the time. Rahab. Okay, let's talk about Rahab. Excuse me. How many of you remember the story, the song? Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. Woo! The walls came tumbling down. Kendall, I can see you remember that song.
Oh, yeah.
You went with BBS or Sunday school, and it was great fun. Remember, we could tune our imaginary horns, walk around in a circle, and then when you go tumbling down, it was like a church version of London Bridge, and the kids all landed in the heap on the floor, giggling. Oh, it was great. It really was. But one of the things about this that I discovered when I wrote the book, you might just read this. Little did I know, as I tooted my imaginary trumpet and fell on the floor in a heap with my friends, that the song we sang rose from a past so different from our own. Birthed in the cotton fields of the antebellum South, this black spiritual exemplifies the double meaning Bible stories acquired among enslaved people. The Bible stories that white slave owners viewed as a civilizing influence were appropriated by the slaves as a metaphor of their own struggle for freedom. And the slaves lent African rhythm and sonorous voice to their suppressed and passionate hope, and created both a musical genre and a spirituality that lives on and inspires to this day. In the Battle of Jericho, those walls that were celebrated as tumbling down were the walls of slavery, and later the Jim Crow laws. And music, that of Joshua's trumpeters and that of suffering blacks, played a key role in making those walls collapse. And the fact that I never saw that, never explored the alternative meaning in this song, suddenly loomed large before me as I read the story of Rahab with these sacred questions in my hand. I had never trembled within Jericho's walls as did Rahab, listening to the terror all around me, for I was too busy shouting and tooting my horn. I placed myself squarely on the side of the conquering army with truly no thought of the other. But now I was imagining myself in the place of Rahab, within those crumbling walls, replacing triumph with terror. Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, celebrates an exultant military victory, the complete destruction of one's foe by force. The fact that such violence is lauded in Scripture is problematic, even when we understand its cultural and historical context. As Christians, we don't care that the king of Moab did the same thing. We care, and it is deeply troubling that our sacred text celebrates it, or at least it should be. We can, and often do, remain inured to what we read and never grow beyond our VBS understanding. But these stories contain larger truths for us if we are willing to explore them. The enslaved people of the American South lent a completely new and redemptive reading to the story because they had a point of view that was different from ours. When we read the stories through the lives of women, those stories are transformed. In her book, Inspired, Rachel Held Evans wrote of Rahab and other women in the Bible's war stories. Now, this is one of the books that United Lutheran did in the book club read, and that's one of the books mentioned in here, and here's a paragraph for that from what she said. If you pay attention to the women, a more complex history of Israel's conquests emerges. Their stories invite the reader to consider the human cost of violence and patriarchy, and in that sense prove instructive to all who wish to work for a better world. It's not always clear what we are meant to learn from the Bible's most troubling stories, but if we simply look away, we learn nothing. So I can't improve on how well she said it, but I think the question, like I say, that is asked in every case is Rahab among us still? Is there still that experience today? You think so, George? Have you watched the TV? Yeah. So these stories still apply. And to me, that's what makes Scripture so valuable. If it was just about then and there, and I read it for information, for the historical significance of it, I don't care. I don't care about the historical significance. It has to have relevancy here and now for us in our time, in our place, in me, in my life, in my relationships. That's the place it becomes powerful and meaningful. So each of these women, I think that story gets asked. I was talking with my sister Beth this morning, and that was her favorite part of the book. She said, it troubled me when I really thought about the fact that I like to think we've come so far, but in some ways we still haven't. All of these things are still happening. She says, but I loved the prayers because they gave me a way to pray for people who are disempowered. So that was Rahab. I think we could maybe do another one. Tamar. I'm glad you asked that because she's the first one in the book, and I think she's also, in some ways, the most difficult to get to. And she's the first in the book because she's the first in the genealogy, because she's the first in the Bible, so she kind of had to be first in the book. But I worried about it as a writer because that's the one where I have to give you a lot of background. This is 4,000 years ago, folks, and so you kind of got, there's more of the scholarship there than in some of the others. And since it's the first one out, I would worry that people would go, oh my gosh, this is way more work than I wanted it to be, and just kind of leave the book on the table and never get back to it. And I want to encourage you beyond that, so thank you for bringing that up. But her story would make no sense without some, in fact, her story would be weird, okay? It's a weird story. I'm telling you that right up front if you don't know it. But you have to understand So persevere, do that, and then you can get into Tamar. So what Tamar does do is some pretty fun and remarkable things. It brings up interesting things to consider. The way that Tamar prevails in her situation is she uses deceit. She dresses as a prostitute, pulls off a big scam, and finally justice is hers. But having said that, the Bible uses a lot of deceit. We have, in the Old Testament, we have Abraham passing Sarah off as his wife, not just once, but apparently twice.
It's his
We have-
sister.
It's his sister, I'm sorry. She is his wife. He tries to pass her off as his sister 2 times. We have the younger child taking the birthright of the older child. These kind of things just happen continually. So it raises the question of deceit. Interestingly enough, it is celebrated. And when the guys pull it off, woohoo! They are so clever. They are so resourceful. They best the big guy. That's all great. When the women pull it off, then they are deceptive, manipulative, and usually has sexual connotations as well. So you begin to see these patterns in Tamar. Now, having said that, this is going to be a little bit of a leap ahead, connecting the dots here. Let's find it. I talked about doing what-ifs. And I maintain that we read the story of Jesus a little differently, knowing about these women. The Jesus that I encountered after working with these women is someone who noticed, remembered, and raised up absolutely everybody. Really get into the Jewishness of Jesus, who received his stories. Judaism, to this day, we know is about remembering the story. There's the Passover every year where they remember the story. Do you know it's told in the present tense? It's never told in the past tense. It said, and so we did this. They have song and food to make it all very contemporary. So Jesus received his stories, and he had a way of receiving other people's stories, so that when he met you, Margaret, he knows all your background. He knows everything there's to know about you. It's already there. And he carries these stories into his life and his ministry. So I'd like to further imagine a story. You all know this one. When the Pharisees bring to Jesus a woman caught in adultery, I wonder if he remembered the stories from his past. The gospel provides the interesting detail that, quote, he bent down and began to write on the ground with his finger. Commentators have speculated down the centuries just what he may have written. A common offering is that perhaps he began to inscribe the sins of those standing before him. I speculate on another possibility. Jesus knew this confrontation was meant to test him, so perhaps in much the same way that we take a pencil and doodle, he drew in the dust and bought time to consider his response. And perhaps as he did so, he remembered. Maybe he traced out T-A-M-A-R, remembering his long-ago ancestor who once stood in the same place as the woman before him. And then, quote, he straightened up and said to them, let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw the stone at her. The clamor that had demanded her death turned suddenly to silence, except for the occasional crunch of a dropped stone. down and wrote on the ground, and in response they went away one by one, beginning with the elders. As he returned to his remembering and writing, perhaps he made the further connection to his own mother, a connection that only he and she and Joseph knew, that she too had been spared this fate. And we note that when he straightens up and finds himself alone with the woman, he addresses her, "Woman, where are they who had condemned you?" These words to her, this address, mirrors exactly the wording he had previously used with his own mother when he spoke with her at Cana. Anyway, there are surprises to be found in all of these stories. And any questions?
How would you define midrash?
Oh, thank you, because I do use the term. Midrash is a rabbinical tool that answers a question within the text by a story. So you're reading along and you encounter something that raises a question. I'll give you an example. Let's use this one. Do you remember the story where Lot's wife is turned into a pillar of salt because she looks over her shoulder? Some of you remember that story. I see some nodding. Okay, so and this is a common thing to the current day, that rabbis will enter the story with questions and provide stories to give answers. So the first rabbi says, she was turned into a pillar of salt because she's going to miss that old lifestyle of hers. So she had to turn around and see it all happen. And because that is the way of women, you know. And zap, she was turned into a pillar of salt. The second rabbi comes in and says, no. She was turned into a pillar of salt because she was curious. That is the way of women, you know, to be nosy. So she just had to see it. She turned around and zap, she was turned into a pillar of salt. The third rabbi comes, and the third rabbi says, no. She turned around because her sister lived in that town, and she was so grieved for what was happening. And as she stood there and grieved and cried so copiously, her tears ran down her body, and the salt of her tears covered her, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. For such is the way of women. Now, you can take whichever story you want, and either way is going to be played on that is the way of women. So there's these wonderful stories within the Jewish tradition that start with a question in the text and provide possible answers. I think what's so appealing to me about them is that they stand alongside one another. There's not the official version. And the invitation, I think, in the scriptures is to explore it for the possibilities within it and what it can hold by way of meaning for you. And my meaning is maybe going to be different than yours is, Harvey, right? We might gain something totally different. And does that mean that only one of those is possible? No. Because the way that God is working in your life and the way that God is working in my life. So midrash, I think, is a corrective to our tendency to be so sure about what it is that God is saying here. Does that help? Thank you. All right. Any other questions real quick? Well, then I'm going to, if you will allow me, I'm going to go to some of the closing lines of the book, send you off before the day is all spent. I remember a friend who shared that every night as the sun went down, her husband would stop, watch until the last light faded, and then sigh and say appreciatively, I hate to say goodbye to this good day. No matter how intentionally we strive to live each day, we cannot hold on to everyone. Some we let go of without regret. And then there are others we want to press like flowers between the pages of our life. Even so, these too dissipate over time. And we sometimes only recognize in hindsight the extraordinary worth of an ordinary day. How can we stand before the night, weighing and sorting, seeking to save, eager to let go? How can we welcome tomorrow without surrendering today to someplace safer than our own recall? What if? What if God treasures our stories? What if God is willing to cherish and to keep all that has been warp and woof and fabric of our life? The Jesus of these stories encourages me in that hope. Nothing is forgotten, nothing is wasted, and that which is harmful for me to keep and carry is gathered up and grasped by stronger hands than mine. And that which is precious and meant for me to treasure and to learn from is carried at the ready by the companion at my side. The Jesus I met in these stories was the Jesus who noticed. He noticed the nameless, the broad, the Moabite, the wife of. It seemed he noticed everyone. I think you could not have hidden from Jesus if you had wanted to. Perhaps you could get lost in the crowd and try to blend in, but Jesus favored deep selecting. He called forth the folks that stood in the back. Labels. Labels are an effective way to hide. Nobody sees you behind a label, but Jesus completely ignores labels of any kind. And in an age of analytics and algorithms, profiling and hashtags, Jesus is hopelessly out of date. He disregards any personal efficiency that puts people into boxes. He seems to prefer real to virtual in every encounter. Lastly, the Jesus of these stories, the Jesus who knows, remembers, and notices. This Jesus expects us to do the same. We sometimes forget that Jesus was also a prophet. In true Nathan-like fashion, he turns every parable on its ear and says, that man is you. Jesus does not speak for our edification or education. His words reach out and pull us into the stories that we may walk around in them and be changed by them. We are denied the option of detached observation. We are called to do as Jesus did, to respect and to honor the dignity of all whom we encounter. We readily see this in the stories we have covered. The wife of Uriah becomes the beloved lamb. Ruth the Moabite becomes the grandmother of a king. Rahab the broad chooses Israel and is remembered for generations to come. And Tamar, the woman who dressed as a prostitute, wore, in reality, a bridal veil. My hope for all who read this book is that your time spent in the company of these women reinforces in you the conviction that you too are known, remembered, noticed, and called to do the same for others. Amen, amen. Amen.
Amen.
you. And if you want me to personalize your book, I'd be happy to do so.